The elementary school auction was coming. So Carrie and I asked the boys if there was anything that was going to be at the auction that they wanted us to bid on. And oh yes, there was one thing that had them interested above all others. And they said, from what they could tell us, that had most of the children in the school very interested. It was the coveted, break all the rules bucket, which is described in the lore of the elementary school, was something that if you had the bucket in your possession, you could get away with anything. You could do anything that you wanted if that bucket was yours. Now, of course, the reality was not quite so grand. You got to chew gum, and you got to walk on the opposite side of the hallway, and it was stuff like that. But still, in the lore of the elementary school, that bucket was awesome. So we said we'd think about it. The great Protestant reformer Martin Luther represented a similar idea 500 years ago. At the time, the church had found the fundraiser par excellence. Now, like we talked about last week, we talked about being wrong. It's very human. Everybody is wrong. And we have inherited this tradition going back, and it's not just Christianity, it's a world tradition that views being wrong, making mistakes, sin, as marks of human brokenness and separation from God's love and mercy. And so 500 years ago, church leaders discovered a market for selling passes to you and your loved ones to escape eternal damnation. You could buy a break all the rules bucket. And here's how it went. If a person died and you had any unconfessed or unforgiven sin, there was no longer any chance to absolve yourself of it because you were dead. Any sin that you committed in the time between the sacrament of communion and the time you died would be held against your soul, particularly if you didn't receive last rites or communion. So, by giving a gift to the church, it would count as an act of repentance and piety on behalf of the dead. You could purchase a get-out-of-hell free pass. And it was called an indulgence. And you could do this not just for people you loved, but you could do it for yourself too. And these things sold. Just like those buckets at the school auction. That bucket went for a lot more than I could ever hope to put on it. But just like those buckets, these indulgences sold, and they sold well. It became the primary fundraiser. In an era of plagues and war, death was a constant companion. And the promise of a glorious afterlife was very appealing. And since religion, church, claimed that it was the gatekeeper between everyday people and God, church leaders exploited this system of indulgences. Now, Martin Luther, he was a church guy. He was, call him a company man. He was a monk. And he wasn't against religion. You could actually say he was kind of obsessed with it. He was obsessed with confession. In fact, he was known sometimes for confessing, and think about this, 6 hours a day of when would you have time to sin? You were just confessing all the time. And he was convinced that God saw him exactly like we talked about last week, fundamentally flawed, separated from God, a disappointment. And Martin's anxiety and stress over all of this, it wreaked havoc on his body. He once said, if I could believe that God was not angry with me, I would stand on my head for joy. This was not a well man. And more than that, he came to realize that he hated God.
A certain man had 2 sons. The younger son said to his father, "Father, give me my share of my inheritance." Then the father divided his estate between them.
I hate you. I wish you were dead. I don't need you anymore. Martin's God tolerated no being wrong, no mistakes, no sin. This God of his had been packaged and sold to him, using fear as a weapon of coercion. Oh, and sometimes things get to a breaking point.
The younger son gathered everything together and took a trip to a land far away. There he wasted his wealth through extravagant living. When he had used up his resources, a severe food shortage arose in that country, and he began to be in need.
Martin was at a crossroads, and like people do, he could have left. He could have gone and become the lawyer that his father always wanted him to be. He could have said, "Enough of the games, I am done." Because you reach the point when you're just done. Done with all that stuff. And the temptation is to just walk. And when you get there, when you get to that point in your life, so much depends on the people that you have in your life. People that you might actually listen to.
He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from what the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I'm starving to death? I will get up and go to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me on as one of your hired hands.'"
There are always people who are going to take you on, use you, make you do things that you know are wrong or that you feel wrong about, like asking a good Jewish kid to feed pigs. There are always people like that. When Martin came to the crossroads in his life, his midlife crisis, he had a friend and a mentor, Johann Staupitz. And Johann opened a new door, a new perspective. That true repentance consists not in self-imposed penances and punishments, but in a change of heart. With Johann, Martin began to unlearn, started anew, was reborn with a new God, a God he discovered in the pages of the Bible. This God wasn't about a list of rules that came with eternal damnation if you stepped out of line. This was the God of resurrecting grace.
So he got up and went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. His father ran to him, hugged him, and kissed him. Then his son said, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fattened calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate.
The God of resurrecting grace and mercy, even without the need to plead for forgiveness. That's the God that Martin met. The God of the break all the rules bucket. Now, in my experience in the United Church of Christ, we have a lot of people, and I refer to them sometimes as religious refugees. People who grew up in Christian traditions that really emphasized guilt and being good. And they've had their own experiences of starting anew with the idea of God's resurrecting grace. But if grace is completely free, if there are no eternal consequences in being wrong, sinning, what's the point? If you've got the break all the rules bucket, why bust yourself to be like Jesus? Caring for the sick and the poor. Justice. Why pray? Why be part of church? Literally, this grace thing, it is like a license to be self-righteous. Because as Jesus said, God makes the sun rise on both the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. There is nothing eternal to be gained by being good. So why bother? If God looks at you and says, "I love you," and there's nothing you can do about it, what's to be gained by living a Christ-like life? And this isn't a new question. Every person who has come to know the God of resurrecting grace asks this question at some point. The Apostle Paul asked it like this in his letter to the Christians in Rome.
Sin will have no power over you. So what? Should we sin because we aren't under law, but under grace?
If someone can't strike the fear of God into you, why be good? Now, as a Jew, Jesus, and Janet would be all over this too. This is a great response. That once you have learned the wisdom and the benefits of a life lived with Torah, with the law, with rules, you discover that that kind of life is its own reward. It's kind of like exercise and proper diets. They say that once you realize how good you can feel, how good you'll feel when you become healthy, you won't want to be sedentary and you won't want to overeat. And I really like that idea. But friends, I am living proof that it does not work. Not for everybody. So let me tell you what I found. What I will testify for. I think that first one, I don't disagree with it at all. Here's what I found.
Jesus said, "You are the light of the world. A city on top of a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on top of a lampstand, and it shines on all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people, so that they can see the good things you do and praise your Father who is in heaven."
If you've experienced love in your life, if you have been so blessed that you know what it means to be loved unconditionally. If you've ever loved somebody like that, if even for a moment you have recognized the light and the life, the worth that God has poured into you, then live a life that shines. Live a life that honors and worships the source, the creator of all love and blessing. Live and practice gratitude for the love that you've received. That's what moves me. Not obligation or duty to someone's standard of goodness, but a real expression of gratitude for the light, the life, and the love that I've been given. This is also the same reason that Martin came to. This is why I worship today. A deep sense of gratitude. Will you pray with me? May everything we do, all our ministries of kindness, love, justice, and mercy, unapologetically honor you, Lord. May our lives reflect your love.